Two reasons. One, I can process, and two, I can actually use this information in a relatively efficient way and get a fast answer, and get some insight, make a different decision in my company.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Robert Schmidt, also known as Mr. IoT. I am the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte with a deep passion for all things digital. This week on Coffee with Mr. IoT, I'm talking with Steve Gold, our Chief Data Scientist in Deloitte. Steve, I don't know, did I make this up that you are Chief Data Scientist, or is that the best description? Hi, by the way, it's good to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, I'm far from the chief data scientist, but for now I'll take it. It's okay.
I made the title of the show "The Magic in the Numbers." You and I actually worked together on a few different things in our past and even in our current. You help when we do IoT projects. You help with algorithms and data science. What does that mean, data science? We hear a lot about this. Everybody says the magic is in the numbers. What does that mean? What does it mean to you? What does it mean out there? What's the thought?
Yeah, I think, look, it means a lot of things. It means different things just about everybody these days. I think people are using that term very loosely. You have people who've done math problems and pivot tables are all of a sudden data scientists. So, unfortunately, it's diluting what it really means. And to me, it means, some very advanced individuals who are brilliant, who can solve problems using algorithms and complex tools. And I think, if you look at this area and the advent of what's happened over the last, call it 5 years, where hedge funds called these guys quants, and they had people in the back room figuring out complex algorithms on when and how to trade stocks faster and what different variables to look at to pull a trigger on a trade. That was sort of the entry point where data science and this whole term got started. But for a long time, these were just, brilliant math professors or people who were scientists who came up using massive amount of data in not traditional ways, now like more mainstream. And so, you got Google and you got Facebook and you got Uber predicting our behaviors. And the way they're doing that is they have an army of data scientists who are figuring out these algorithms, and they're able to predict, people's next move or what the buying intent is, or if there's fraud in something. And, so I think what it means long-term is there's a real need for expertise in this field.
Why is data science becoming so big right now? I mean, I remember 20 years ago when I started working my first job at Procter & Gamble. I have to say I have a master's in petroleum engineering. There's a lot of data and mathematics that go on there. And I went there and I was kind of surprised because the most complicated math I did was percentage calculations. And then when I brought Monte Carlo simulation to tell people there's no one answer, there's a curve of answers, people went like, and so, but that's 20 years ago, and I think that things have changed. Why is it so big today? Is it IoT that makes it all big? What is it?
I think IoT is part of it. First of all, computing power for sure is part of it. You couldn't ingest and process these kind of questions and these petabytes of data in an easy way until very recently. So I think just data processing is the first advent that's come along, that now we can take mass amount of data and process them in a relatively fast way. I think the other thing is corporate America especially has been focused on gut feel. If I know that I can sell 100 widgets last year, I'm going to sell 100 widgets this year, and damn it, that's 100 widgets. And so I think now you have an idea that if I can process this data in a different way, if I can understand it in a different way, and it really gives me insight into a problem, I get a different answer. Maybe I'm only going to make 70 widgets. And I think for those two reasons: one, I can process, and two, I can actually use this information in a relatively efficient way and get a fast answer, and get some insight, make a different decision in my company. Those two things have become everyone's doing it. And, when I swipe my Chase card, or I get an email saying my Chase card, did you buy this thing in Mexico or not? And I'm sitting in Chicago because it's detecting fraud or something. Like, somebody has built an algorithm that's detecting that it's not me doing it. And that wasn't possible 5 years ago. So, the advent of that data stream and understanding it, and then going through an algorithm and then processing it and then getting it to the user to say, is this really you? Just think about how many people have to connect to make that happen. Didn't happen. It's all automated. It's all because of IoT. It's because of data processing. It's because there's a need for people realizing they can solve that problem in a way they haven't solved it before.
So it's more data today than we ever had, plus the accessibility of cheaper, higher-end processing. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that's the majority of it. It couldn't happen otherwise. And then you have other things, like you have more data scientists. A lot of this code is open source, so it's available to everybody to play with. My son, who's 16 years old, he can actually download these things and manipulate data if he wants. I mean, there's no barrier to entry. So anybody can literally become their own data scientist if they want, because they can download the algorithm, they can run data through it, and they can figure out a better answer. So there's also accessibility to these algorithms, where historically you had to be an extreme math professor, and now the usability is much easier than it ever was.
Are you a former math professor? What's your personal data scientist sort of like? Where does your math start and end?
My math ended and started with my ACT score, I think, years ago.
Oh, come on.
No, look, my background, I mean, I had the privilege of, first I was a partner in a large consulting firm for a long time, and then I was recruited into industry. I was the chief supply chain officer for all of PepsiCo. So when you're the chief supply chain officer at PepsiCo, you have big problems, like how many Fritos do I make, and is this Gatorade going to sell, and who's drinking Pepsi, who's not drinking Pepsi. And you don't know how to, you get 10 different answers if you ask a question, like how many did we sell last week? And there aren't data systems or processes to know those answers, let alone I want to introduce a new flavor or a new package or something into the marketplace. And when you're sitting in that seat at someone like PepsiCo or any big company, you have to rely on others in the gut feel. You don't have supporting data to actually help you figure these questions out. When I was introduced to this whole area of data science or predictive analytics, I recognized that, wow, now there are tools out there that maybe weren't even available 5 years ago that can help you figure questions like that out. So, for me as past operator, somebody who's had to deal with massive questions that were very hard to answer because there's so much data and you couldn't answer them fast enough, and you had to report quarterly earnings, whatever it was, just couldn't be done. Now, I have a certain appreciation for this area because I can solve the problem, or you can have a data scientist solve the problem. You get a real answer, and you can actually report on it, and it's backed up not by experiential learning or the guy who's been in the company for 20 years, but actually by the data. So for me, I'm far from a mathematician, but I'm very close to how do I solve a problem in a corporate America. And I think that, back to your earlier question, why is data science becoming so pervasive? Companies are recognizing that they don't need hundreds and armies of people to get a gut feel, that they can actually rely, pretty heavily now on what the data is saying and process it through information systems that they couldn't do it before.
So I listened to you, how you talk about these supply chain problems when you were at PepsiCo, and I worked for Procter & Gamble for a while, and so I have a bit of an appreciation. I've been in big, large corporations for a while. What do you do when what the data tells you actually don't like? I mean, often it's about, hey, it's this year plus 5%, and it's been plus 5% the last 10 years. Damn you, coming back to me telling me data says it's going to be +1, where you're going to find the extra 4. What do you do when the data, the facts, don't match up with what you told the street, what your expectations are? There's a whole bunch of other things. What do you do then?
Right. That is the best question, because
okay. I got it.
Yeah. If you are the influencer in the room, you're going to have a biased answer, and you're going to force that biased answer, whether it's right or wrong. History says that you put 10 people in a room, and the person with the loudest voice or who's been there forever, they're going to influence the conversation. So now you're going to introduce fact-based data. You're going to introduce real data with really processed. And now what do you do? Because you can't rely on the smartest person in the room or the biased approach. You're going to rely on the data. And that's very different for a lot of organizations. So I think what we're seeing, at least in my practice, is it's hard. It's super hard for organizations to believe that I only need to make 70 widgets instead of 100 widgets this month because I've always made 100. And my plant is geared to make 100, and I'm staffed to make 100, and I've got trucks that are going to deliver 100 widgets. And I'm going to make 70. That's a totally different staffing model and how much inventory I need and how much raw material I need and what I tell myself. Preparation of that answer has major impacts, and not everybody's ready for it. So I think what we're seeing are many companies, once they get their arms around these kind of solutions, that it's a big, actually, change management play. Like, I got to retool my company to think differently. I got to retool to be more flexible, and because it's not hardwired anymore. But at the end of the day, I'm going to make either better, make more money, or be more profitable, or reduce my cost by leveraging these capabilities. The organization has to be able to follow, and I think that's as hard a problem as actually getting the fact-based answer. So, yeah, I think we're getting into a cultural shift for a lot of organizations as they adopt these tools. And it's new and different for everyone, but the data is the data. It speaks for itself.
It's really interesting, right? I sit here and I have to think back to my very first boss, Thomas Tuchel, who's now the Chief Operating Officer at Activision. He was my boss actually a few times in my life, and he's more of a friend even now than anything. And he was the hardest boss. He was the smartest boss I ever had, but he was also one of the most challenging bosses, as it often goes with this. And he's such a data guy, but he's also such a driver and influencer. I'd love to have him right now actually chat with us about this. Maybe we'll do this another time. By the way, if you're just joining us now, I'm Robert Schmidt, Deloitte's Chief IoT Technologist, and you're watching Coffee with Mr. IoT. Today, I have as my guest Steve Gold, and we're talking about the magic of numbers. Steve, let me switch, just make this switch kind of crass and different. I've seen you talk, and often when you talk, you use some very, very concrete examples of what is data science. I know I've heard you talk about the Golden State Warriors, Netflix, Katy Perry, Match.com. Can you just take your favorite one or two examples and tell us about this? Besides the fact that some of those now work with us here in Deloitte and are Deloitte employees, but I don't know. I have to tell you, the Golden State Warrior one is always the one that kind of kicks me, but pick one, whatever you like.
Yeah, so I mean, the Golden State Warrior example I use a lot because there's a guy named Joe Lackup who is a very successful venture capital partner at Kleiner Perkins, and he went and bought the Golden State Warrior basketball team, and they weren't exactly performing well. But Joe is a super analytical guy, and what he did is he looked at the history of the two-point shot and the history of the three-point shot. And the two-point shot is typically made about 50% of the time in the NBA. So every time somebody takes if you only make it 50% of the time, the two-point shot's only worth 1 point. But the history of the three-point shot, if you chart that, if you look at the late 70s and early 80s, when it was introduced, a lot of people didn't know how to make the three-point shot. It was new, and there wasn't very good progress. But if you look at the history into the 2000s and now into the late 2000s, people are getting much better at getting the three-point shot. So, the propensity to make the three-point shot is about 35-40%. So if you take a lot of three-point shots, you get like 1.2 points for every time you make it. And so Joe Lackup and his team took a lot of time looking at the two-point shot, three-point shot. And what he figured out is if he made more three-point shots than two-point shots, he could win every game. So to fulfill that strategy, he went out and he got Steph Curry. And last year, the Golden State Warriors shot more three-point shots than ever in the history of the NBA, and they almost won the whole thing. They came in second place. So, to me, you don't need a lot of data scientists around the room to figure that out, right? That's like just smart guys. And you see, I'm from Chicago. I'm here in Chicago today. Theo Epstein, the Chicago Cubs. He did it at the Red Sox. He's the same formula. Hired, really good talent on the Cubs, and the Cubs won the World Series. And so there's a lot of sporting analogies where, you don't need a lot of data elements, heavy duty processing to say just shoot more 3-point shots, you win more games. And I think what the point of that is there's a lot of really smart managers who walk into companies and they have a different view of how to improve. And it's the simplest analytic that they understand or they put to the test and they followed up. In this case, Joe Lobkov went and got Steph Curry, and what do you know? They won games and they turned around the basketball team. And so I think there's a lot of that kind of play out there. But that's not, to me, like data science or big data problems. That's basic kind of 101. Like, okay, I want to be a better manager. I need data. I'm going to look at the problem differently. So I think, to me, data science gets into more things like, I use like the Katy Perry example, Match.com and these things. Like my grandmother used to predict who I should go out on a date with, and now I feed all that data into Match.com. I'm married happily. My wife, I didn't meet her at Match.com, but you feed that data into Match.com, it has an algorithm, and the algorithm determines who the best match is. And so we take that for granted now, like, oh, like grandma is out of the picture, and we move to something like Match.com or JDate or something that people are really using, and it's being substituted for grandma. Well, that's really math. That's really science underlying that matching algorithm that's working there. And so as consumers, we're used to those kind of things. We get onto Amazon.com and it says recommend, you read this book, recommend that book. There's another algorithm working in the background to do those things. And the typical consumer doesn't learn to recognize that there's science and math and data scientists behind these tools, but that's what makes them work. So what we like to say is, the analogy is, well, if you can do that in Match.com, why don't you do that in your everyday business? Like, why aren't we forecasting products that way? Why aren't we predicting customer attrition that way? Because the same algorithms that are doing that, even the same algorithms that are making the Google car go down the street without a driver, are just math and algorithms. Those same algorithms can be used for everyday business problems. So we try and help people understand that, as a consumer, we're used to these things. They're in the background. They happen all the time. But in our business world, it's really lagging. There hasn't been huge adoption of these kind of tools and algorithms in everything we do. And there should be. And the final example I usually give is, like a hurricane. When a hurricane comes, what happens? Like, there's data looking from satellites saying that, okay, the waves are getting bigger and the winds are going in this direction and the water temperature is going up. So we think a hurricane pattern is coming. And there's algorithms going through that data to say, oh yeah, indeed, this is a category 4. There's a hurricane coming and it's going to hit, the Puerto Rico in one day. And so everyone's got plenty of time to prepare because it's integrated into the workflow. Like, the hurricane's coming, we identified the pattern, and then our TVs go off and our cell phones go off as a take cover, put boards up, and in a very short amount of time, with almost no reaction time, an event happens and we react to it. And we're very successful at reacting to those kind of things because it's integrated into the workflow. It tells us to go do something. The same kind of thing in business. We don't have that same kind of integration into the workflow. We don't have those algorithms say, hey, Robert's not buying next week our products. We should do something. We should stimulate him. We should send him an email. We should make him a promotion. We should send him an offer. Some companies do that, and they're sort of guessing. Like, I get a lot of airline kind of things like, hey, Steve, we know you like skiing. How about a ski trip? Well, I happen to be sitting in Beaver Creek, and they're sending me that email. They just don't have it worked out totally correctly yet. They're sending me an email just like they're sending you an email. But the idea is, well, if they can really target me to say, next year, if you come back to Beaver Creek, we'll give you 20% off your flight, that might stimulate me to go do something. So I think, if we look at common day businesses, we're not there yet in integrating the same kind of thing where we are. Think about hurricanes, think about Match.com, think about Amazon, those kind of tools we just become so used to in our everyday life hasn't really worked its way into so many business applications.
Sounds to me like, listening to you, there's sort of like the very simple kind of math, the math I do. Probability of a 2-pointer is 50%, it's 1 point. The probability of a 3-pointer is 35%, so it's like 1.2 points. I can do that math. And, I'm still going to be successful if I apply some simple math like this. Then there's sort of like the next step of algorithms around Amazon recommending a book, or, you talked about, what's another example you used, or the Match.com algorithm. And then there's sort of like really chaos theory around weather and all those kind of patterns, which is way out there. Is that still true, actually, that weather is sort of like the most complicated thing to predict?
Yeah, I think it is a very complicated thing to predict, but I think people are getting much, much better at it.
So I have to sort of ask you a totally different question. You live in data in your professional life all day, every day, right? And this is what you do. By the way, I still didn't quite catch the connection between Katy Perry and Match.com, but that's a different question. So what does that do your personal life? Do you do you have algorithms run to tell you what stock to buy tomorrow? Do you have an algorithm running that tells you when the milk runs out in the fridge and you send your wife an automated email, or you have someone bring it? Or, I mean, seriously, I'm not trying to be funny here. I always find how what we do for a living kind of influence our personal life. How does that work for you?
Yeah, and I'll just tell you the quick synopsis on Katy Perry. So, Katy Perry put her information into Match.com, and every time will come up with Russell Brand. So it's an easy prediction that the two of them would get married. But Google actually has an algorithm that predicts the likelihood of Hollywood divorces. And so you can put in data for every Hollywood couple, and they have this algorithm you can run that says the probability of, Brad and Angelina getting divorced is they can score it. And so it's actually an easier prediction to predict that Katy Perry and Russell Brand would end up getting divorced than it was that they get married. So that's what I typically talk about. That's how Katy Perry fits the Match.com. But relative to my personal life, look, I mean, I would tell my kids don't respond to anything they get on the internet from people they don't know, because I think the world is collecting a lot of data. I keep a Band-Aid over my video camera here because
explain it to us. I saw it. It's really cool. Please.
It's the hold on, the SpongeBob Band-Aid.
Oh, that's so cool.
Actually, I think it's I forgot her name. Not Sandy the squirrel. But no, I think there's a lot of data being collected, whether we know it or not, whether it's active or passive. And there's some stuff like, yeah, we got your cookie on your internet site, but there's more pervasive information. Like you go down the line, yeah, someone's stealing credit card information from Target or something. That's a problem. But then there's all kinds of information. So I just I'm sort of an old school individual as it comes to these kind of questions. My wife still writes her own checkbook. She's not a QuickBooks. She doesn't keep our accounting for our personal finances at home. I don't rely on any of the stock market, algorithms or whatnot. So I'd say we're very old school, because I'm a little fearful of the data that's out there that's being collected about our behaviors. And I think more and more organizations want to know. Like, I want to know for our clients, right? Because if we know that, then we can help them sell more. Wells Fargo got into huge problems last year because they were, finding out people's personas, and they're cross-selling them products, and that was a bad thing, but they were making a lot of money. So I think that just in natural in business, people are looking for what's the next angle, how do I get an edge, how to work it, and there's stuff being collected on us. So I try and opt out as much as I can.
That's fascinating. You just started a whole nother coffee chat, and me saying now we have reached the end of this. Some people will really get mad at me, but time-wise, I think I'm going to have you back and we talk about the privacy aspect. So it looks like we're coming to a close here. I want to thank you, Steve, for a great conversation. I think deep in my heart there's some math guy that really didn't come out, so I really, really enjoyed this. Please join me and join Heather Engel and me next Friday again, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another Coffee with Mr. IoT. And if you missed any part of today's conversation, or you want to watch again a past episode, they're all on my YouTube channel. And with that, I want to say, Steve, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have you on. Happy Friday, and I'll see you maybe next week out where we do our work together. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.